They said there was nothing left to try, that 25 trained medics had already done everything possible. But Emily Carter felt something was off the second she stepped into Trauma Bay 3. The air too controlled, the silence between alarms too clean, like the room was missing a truth no one wanted to see. General Robert Hayes lay on the table, 6 feet tall, decorated, respected, now reduced to numbers on a monitor that insisted he was stable while his skin told a different story. A faint gray tone creeping beneath the surface, subtle enough to ignore if you didn't know what it meant. Vitals are holding, a senior doctor said, voice tight but confident. We stay the course, and heads nodded because experience demanded trust, because rank demanded obedience, because no one wanted to admit uncertainty in a room like this. Emily stood near the supply cart, unnoticed, just another young nurse assigned to assist. Her badge still too new, her voice not yet earned, but her eyes moved differently, tracking breath patterns, chest movement, the slight delay between inhale and response, something she had seen before, somewhere far from polished floors and bright hospital lights. She took one step closer, slow, careful, as if crossing an invisible line, her fingers brushing the edge of the table while she watched the rise of his ribs, uneven, restricted, wrong. You need something? A resident asked, barely glancing at her, already turning away before she could answer, because in his mind she had nothing to add. Emily didn't respond, not right away, because doubt wasn't loud. It was quiet, persistent, like a memory you couldn't fully place, a moment where everything looked fine until it suddenly wasn't. The room buzzed with controlled urgency, orders spoken, tools exchanged. But beneath it all she felt the same pressure she remembered from a different kind of room, one without monitors, without backup, where the only thing that mattered was recognizing the moment before it was too late. Her eyes narrowed slightly, focusing on the smallest detail, the way his chest shifted unevenly, the way his breathing didn't match the numbers on the screen, and for a brief second the noise around her faded, replaced by a distant echo of rotor blades and shouted coordinates. A place where hesitation cost more than pride. We're not seeing improvement. Another voice admitted, quieter now, uncertainty slipping in, and Emily knew that was the moment. The exact moment where decisions changed outcomes, where someone either stepped forward or stayed silent. She swallowed once, steadying herself, knowing what she was about to say would be ignored, maybe even dismissed, but also knowing that doing nothing would be worse. Doctor, she said, her voice calm, almost too calm for the tension in the room. Something's wrong with his breathing, and for a heartbeat no one answered, because she was just the nurse, just the new one, just the person no one expected to see what 25 others had already missed. No one responded at first, not because they did not hear her, but because acknowledging her meant admitting something had been missed, and that was not something this room did easily. The senior physician barely looked up, eyes still locked on the monitor, as if the numbers could reassure him. Vitals are stable, he repeated, slower this time, like saying it again would make it true. But Emily did not step back. She moved half an inch closer, enough to see the subtle tension in the general's neck, the way his body resisted each breath like something inside was pushing back. Stable does not mean safe, she said quietly, and that was enough to draw a few glances, not respectful, not yet, just curious, maybe irritated. A resident exhaled sharply, shaking his head. We have got this under control, he said, though his voice lacked the certainty it had a minute ago, and Emily caught that too. The crack beneath the confidence, the moment where doubt begins to surface. Her gaze dropped to the general's chest again, watching the rhythm, counting silently, 1, 2, 3, something did not align, the expansion too limited on one side, the delay too precise to be random, and that memory pressed harder now, no longer distant, no longer faint. It was clear, sharp, a pattern burned into her instincts from a place where hesitation cost lives. She leaned in slightly, her voice still calm but firmer. His breathing is restricted on the left side, she said, choosing her words carefully, not dramatic, not emotional, just fact. It is not matching the monitor. And this time the room shifted, just a little, because facts were harder to ignore than concern. The senior physician finally looked at her fully, studying her face as if trying to measure whether she understood the weight of what she was implying. "We ran scans," he replied. "Controlled, measured. There is nothing indicating that." But even as he spoke, one of the nurses nearby hesitated, her eyes flicking between Emily and the patient, uncertainty spreading quietly through the edges of the team. Emily did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply reached for a stethoscope, her movements steady, practiced, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. And when she placed it against the general's chest, her expression did not change, but something in her posture settled, like a question had just been answered. She listened once, then again, slower, deeper, isolating the sound beneath the noise, and when she pulled back, her eyes lifted with quiet certainty. "There is pressure building," she said, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the truth to land where it needed to. "It is not showing yet, but it will." And the silence that followed was different now, heavier, because doubt had turned into possibility, and possibility meant they might have been wrong. The senior physician stepped closer, his hand hovering over the patient as if unsure whether to trust his experience or this quiet voice that refused to disappear, and for a brief second, the entire room held its breath, waiting to see which one would matter more. The senior physician did not answer immediately, his eyes fixed on the general's chest as if he could will the pattern to change, but it did not. That slight delay between breath and movement still there, subtle, easy to dismiss, yet impossible to ignore once seen. "Explain it," he said finally, not as a command, but as a test, and every pair of eyes in the room shifted toward Emily, no longer dismissive, now measuring. She did not rush, did not try to impress. She simply spoke the way someone does when they have already seen the outcome play out before. "The pressure is not showing on the monitor yet because it is building slowly," she said, her voice steady, grounded. "But the restriction is already there. You can hear it if you listen past the surface." And she placed the stethoscope back into the physician's hand, not forcing, just offering. He hesitated for half a second, then followed her cue, positioning it where she had, listening once, then again, his expression tightening as the same faint imbalance revealed itself, a difference so slight it could be overlooked, yet now impossible to unhear. "Run it again," he said to the team, his tone sharper now, urgency slipping in, and movement returned to the room, faster, less certain, as new scans were ordered, equipment adjusted, protocols quietly questioned. Emily stepped back, not seeking space, just returning to where she had been. But her attention never left the patient, her mind already 2 steps ahead, calculating timing, margin. What would happen if they waited too long? The resident who had dismissed her earlier watched her now with a different expression, confusion mixed with something close to respect, as if trying to understand how someone so quiet could see what so many had missed. The monitor beeped steadily, unchanged, almost mocking the tension in the room, and for a moment it felt like everything was suspended between 2 truths, one visible, one hidden. Then the new imaging came through, the screen flickering before settling into focus, and the shift in the physician's posture said everything before he spoke, his shoulders stiffening, his breath catching just enough to betray realization. "There it is," he said under his breath, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for those closest to hear, and a ripple moved through the team. Not panic, but recognition, the kind that comes when certainty breaks. The pressure was real, just as she had said, building in a way that standard readings had not yet captured, a narrow window that had nearly closed without anyone noticing. "Prep for intervention," he ordered. This time without hesitation, and no one questioned it, because the evidence was there now, undeniable. But as the team moved into action, his eyes flicked back to Emily for a fraction of a second, something unspoken passing between them, not gratitude yet, not fully, but the beginning of it. She met his gaze briefly, then looked away, already focused on what came next. Because for her this was not the moment of recognition, it was simply the moment to act, the same way it had always been, long before anyone in this room had ever known her name. The room moved faster now, but not smoother. Urgency had replaced confidence, and every motion carried the weight of a mistake that almost happened. Trays shifted, instruments prepared, Voices sharpened as roles adjusted in real time. Yet through it all, Emily stood just behind the line, not assigned, not called, but still watching every detail like it was second nature. We need to relieve the pressure before it escalates, the senior physician said, his tone controlled but tighter than before. And for the first time since she entered the room, his authority sounded like it was adapting instead of leading. A nurse hesitated near the tray, unsure which instrument to hand over first, the sequence slightly off, just enough to slow the rhythm. And Emily noticed immediately, her hand moving without thought, selecting the correct tool and placing it within reach before anyone asked, her timing precise, seamless, like she had always been part of this team. The physician glanced at her. Briefly, just a flicker of recognition, then continued, trusting the flow without questioning it, because now there was no room left for doubt, only action. The monitor began to shift, small fluctuations that signaled the condition was changing, not worsening yet, but no longer stable, and the room tightened around that realization. "Stay with me," someone said near the head of the bed, though it felt less like a command and more like a plea to keep everything from slipping again. Emily's eyes stayed on the general's chest, tracking the rhythm as it adjusted, waiting for the exact moment when intervention would either correct the problem or come. Too late. Her breathing slowed, steady, controlled, the same way it always did when everything around her began to accelerate, because speed without precision meant nothing. "Now," the physician said, and the procedure began, careful, measured, each step deliberate, but there was still a fraction of hesitation in the room, a lingering doubt that had not fully disappeared. Emily stepped closer again, just enough to see the angle, the placement, the alignment, and something in her expression shifted, not panic, not urgency, just certainty, quiet and unshakable. "A little lower," she said softly, almost under her breath, but the physician heard it, his hand pausing for a split second before adjusting exactly as she indicated, and that moment, that single adjustment, changed everything. The monitor reacted almost instantly, the rhythm stabilizing, the subtle imbalance correcting, and the tension that had filled the room released in a way that no one spoke about, because they all felt it at the same time. A breath returned, deeper this time, more even, more real, and for the first time since the general arrived, it looked like he was actually recovering instead of just holding on. Silence followed, not empty, but heavy with understanding, because everyone in that room knew how close it had been, how easily it could have gone the other way. The senior physician stepped back slightly, his focus still on the patient, but his thoughts clearly elsewhere now, replaying the last few minutes. The missed detail, the quiet voice that refused to be ignored. His eyes shifted toward Emily again, longer this time, searching, not for confirmation, but for explanation, because what she had done was not luck, it was not guesswork, it was something learned, something practiced far beyond the walls of this hospital. Emily met his gaze for a brief second, then looked away, already moving back toward the edge of the room, returning to where she had started, as if none of it had mattered, as if saving a life was just another step in a process she had followed many times before, leaving behind a room full of people who were only beginning to understand who she really was. The room did not celebrate. No one spoke, because the kind of relief they felt did not come with noise. It came with a quiet shift in posture, in breathing, in the way hands slowed down once the crisis passed. General Hayes remained stable now, his chest rising evenly, the earlier imbalance gone, and the monitors finally matched what the body was doing, no longer hiding the truth behind clean numbers. "Maintain observation," the senior physician said, his voice lower than before, almost reflective, as if each word carried more weight now, and the team followed without question, their movements more careful, more aware, like they had just been reminded how close precision lived next to error. Emily had already stepped back again, returning to the edge of the room, her hands resting lightly against the counter, her breathing steady, unchanged, as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. A younger nurse approached her quietly, hesitation in her steps. "How did you know?" she asked, not accusing, not doubting, just trying to understand. But Emily only gave a small glance toward the patient before answering. "It did not match," she said simply. And that was all. No explanation, no story, just a truth that felt too small for what it had just done. Across the room, the senior physician removed his gloves slowly, his eyes never leaving the general, but his thoughts clearly somewhere else, replaying the moment when he almost dismissed her, when certainty nearly outweighed observation. He turned slightly, looking toward Emily again, this time with intention, not curiosity, and walked over with measured steps, the kind that signaled a conversation that mattered. "You saw something 25 others did not," he said, not as a challenge, but as a statement he was still processing, and for a moment the room seemed to quiet around them, conversations lowering, attention shifting subtly without anyone making it obvious. Emily met his gaze, calm as before, unaffected by the attention. "It was there," she replied, her tone even, as if the answer was obvious. But the physician studied her more closely now, noticing the way she stood, balanced, grounded, the way her eyes moved not with uncertainty but with quiet calculation, like someone who had learned to read patterns under pressure. "Where did you train?" he asked, the question finally leaving his mouth, direct, unavoidable, because what he had witnessed did not come from textbooks alone. Emily paused for just a fraction of a second, not searching for an answer, but deciding how much of it to give, her gaze shifting briefly toward the general before returning to him. "Different places," she said, the same words she had used before, but now they carried a weight that felt heavier in the silence between them. The physician did not press further, not yet, because something in her tone suggested that the full answer was not something easily explained, and maybe not something meant to be shared here. Behind them, the team continued their work, quieter now, more deliberate, each movement reflecting a subtle change in how they saw the room, the patient, and the quiet nurse standing just outside the center of it all. One of the residents who had dismissed her earlier stood a few feet away, watching, his expression no longer skeptical, but unsettled in a different way, as if realizing that experience did not always look the way he expected it to. Emily glanced once more at the general, confirming his stability, then reached for a tray to organize supplies, slipping back into her role without hesitation, without acknowledgement, as if the moment had already passed for her, even though for everyone else in that room, it had just begun to change everything they thought they understood. The tension did not disappear, it changed shape, settling into something quieter, more aware, as if the entire room had learned to listen more carefully after nearly missing what mattered most. General Hayes remained stable, his breathing now consistent, each rise and fall no longer questioned, but no one stepped too far away, not yet, because trust had been shaken, not in the outcome, but in the process that led to it. Emily continued organizing instruments, her movements unhurried, precise, placing each item exactly where it belonged, restoring order without drawing attention, yet the atmosphere around her had shifted. People glanced at her now, subtle, quick looks, the kind that carried questions they were not ready to ask out loud. Across the room, the senior physician stood with his arms crossed, not in authority, but in thought, his gaze occasionally drifting toward her, studying details he had overlooked before, the steadiness in her posture, the way she seemed to anticipate needs before they were spoken, the absence of hesitation that did not match her position. One of the nurses approached him quietly, lowering her voice. "She called it before the scan," she said, as if confirming something that still felt unreal, and he nodded once, slow, acknowledging what they had both witnessed without needing to explain it further. The resident who had dismissed her earlier finally stepped closer, stopping a few feet away, uncertain how to begin. "Emily," he said, testing her name like it carried new meaning, and she looked up, calm, attentive. "Yes," she answered, simple, neutral, giving him nothing to react to except her presence. He hesitated, searching for the right words, then settled on honesty. "I did not see it," he admitted, not defensive, just real, and Emily held his gaze for a moment before replying. "You will next time." Her tone quiet, not comforting, not critical, just certain, and something in that certainty landed deeper than any explanation could have. A faint sound came from the bed, not an alarm, not a warning, just a small shift, but every head turned instantly, reflex, sharpened by what had just happened, and the team responded faster now, more connected, more alert, their movements aligned without needing direction. The senior physician stepped in again, checking readings, confirming stability, then paused, his hand resting lightly against the side rail, his thoughts clearly still working through the earlier moment, the narrow gap between control and failure. He turned slightly toward Emily once more. But this time he did not ask a question. He simply said, "Stay close." And it was not an order, it was recognition, the kind that changes roles without announcing it. Emily gave a small nod, no reaction beyond that, as if the request changed nothing for her. Because she had already been doing exactly that from the beginning. Outside the immediate circle, a few staff members exchanged quiet words, piecing together what they had seen, how a detail so small could shift everything, how someone they had barely noticed had become the reason the outcome changed. The room settled into a new rhythm, one that carried less certainty but more awareness, each person now watching a little closer, thinking a little deeper, and in the middle of it all, Emily remained exactly where she had always been, not at the center, not seeking recognition, just present, steady, like someone who understood that the real work was not in being seen, but in seeing what others could not. The room had settled into a fragile calm, the kind that felt earned but not fully trusted, and for the first time since the crisis began, the sound of steady breathing filled the space without tension pressing against it. General Hayes remained stable, his chest rising with a rhythm that now made sense, but no one moved too far away, not yet, because moments like this had a way of shifting without warning. Emily stood near the foot of the bed, her eyes still on the patient, not out of fear, but out of habit, the kind built from repetition in places where leaving too soon meant losing everything. The senior physician reviewed the latest readings, slower now, more deliberate, as if each number needed to be earned before it could be believed, and when he finally nodded to himself, it was subtle, almost private, a confirmation that the immediate danger had passed. A nurse adjusted the 4-line carefully, double-checking her work, while another monitored oxygen levels with a focus that had sharpened since earlier, every action now carrying a quiet awareness that had not been there before. "He is holding," someone said softly, not announcing it, just acknowledging it, and the words seemed to settle over the room like a breath finally released. Emily glanced briefly at the monitor, then back to the general, her attention never fixed on one thing for too long, always scanning, always reading the space between what was visible and what might be coming next, across from her. The resident who had spoken to her earlier lingered, watching her with a different kind of focus now, not trying to challenge, not trying to prove anything, just trying to understand, and after a moment he stepped closer again, quieter this time. "You did not hesitate," he said, more observation than question, and Emily's response came without delay. There was no time. Simple, direct, nothing more added. But the weight of it stayed in the air longer than expected. He nodded slowly, as if that answer carried more meaning than he could fully process, because it was not just about speed, it was about certainty, the kind that did not come from training alone. Near the head of the bed, the senior physician removed his gloves again, setting them aside with care, his movements measured, his expression thoughtful, and when he looked up, his gaze moved past the patient and settled on Emily once more, not searching this time, but recognizing something he could not ignore. "You have seen this before," he said, not as a question, but as a realization forming in real time, and Emily paused just long enough to acknowledge it without confirming it, her eyes lowering briefly before returning to the patient. "Something like it," she replied, her tone steady, giving only what was necessary. The physician studied her for another second, then gave a small nod, accepting the answer for what it was, incomplete but honest in its own way. The team continued working around them, quieter now, more connected, each movement reflecting a shift that no one needed to explain, because they had all felt it. That moment where everything could have gone wrong and did not, because someone chose to see instead of assume. A soft sound came again from the bed, not alarming, just a sign of recovery, and this time the response was calm, controlled, no rush, no panic, just awareness. Emily adjusted her position slightly, ensuring she had a clear view, her presence steady, unspoken, and as the room settled further into stability, one thing had changed completely. No one in that space saw her as just a nurse anymore. But no one said it out loud either, because some truths did not need words. They revealed themselves in silence. The rhythm in the room had changed in a way no one could measure, not with machines, not with charts, but in the way people moved, the way they paused before speaking, the way their eyes no longer skimmed over details they once ignored. General Hayes remained stable, his breathing even, his color slowly returning, and yet no one treated it as a finished outcome, because they had all felt how close it came to slipping away. The senior physician stood at the side of the bed, reviewing the latest updates, but his attention kept drifting, not to the monitors, but to the quiet presence across the room, the one variable he had not accounted for. Emily adjusted a tray, aligning instruments with careful precision, her focus unchanged, as if the earlier moment had already settled into the past. But something about her stillness carried a weight that lingered. "Run another check in 5 minutes," the physician said, his voice steady, though softer now, less commanding, more aware, and the team responded immediately, their movements coordinated without hesitation. A nurse nearby whispered to another, not gossip, just quiet recognition. She saw it before anyone else. And the words traveled no further than a few feet, but they did not need to, because the room already knew. The resident stood near the monitor, watching the numbers stabilize, then glanced at Emily again, his expression thoughtful, almost unsettled, as if trying to reconcile what he had witnessed with everything he believed about experience and hierarchy. "You ever worked trauma outside a hospital?" he asked, the question tentative, not intrusive, just searching for context, and Emily paused briefly before answering. "Different environments," she said, her tone unchanged, offering nothing that could be easily defined. He nodded slowly, accepting that answer even though it explained very little, because something in her voice suggested that the full story did not belong here. Across the room, the senior physician stepped closer once more, stopping a few feet from her, not interrupting, just observing, and after a moment he spoke, quieter than before. "You do not react like someone new." And this time it was not a question, it was a conclusion. Emily met his gaze for a second, calm as always, then looked back toward the patient. "I learned to watch first," she replied. Simple, almost understated, but it carried a depth that lingered in the silence that followed. The physician studied her a moment longer, then gave a slight nod, not pressing further, because he understood that some experience did not come with explanations, it came with results. Behind them, the team continued their work, steady, controlled, but the energy had shifted permanently, every movement now shaped by the awareness that what they almost missed had been right in front of them. A faint movement came from the bed again, the general responding more naturally now, and this time the reaction was measured, confident, not rushed, because they were no longer guessing, they were observing. Emily stepped closer just enough to confirm what she already knew, her eyes tracing the pattern of recovery. Then she eased back again, returning to her place without needing acknowledgement. No one told her to stay, no one asked her to leave. She simply existed within the space like she had always belonged there. And in that quiet moment, without any formal words, without any announcement, the entire room had adjusted around her, not because she demanded it, but because she had already proven something none of them could ignore. The final set of readings came in steady, consistent, no fluctuations, no hidden irregularities, just clean data that matched what everyone could now see with their own eyes. And for the first time since the general arrived, the room exhaled without hesitation. "He is out of immediate danger," the senior physician said, not loudly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear, and the words settled differently this time, not as relief alone, but as confirmation of a moment they would not forget. The team began to transition, some stepping back, others preparing for transfer, their movements efficient yet quieter, shaped by a new awareness that lingered beneath the surface. Emily checked the final tray, ensuring everything was accounted for, her hands steady, her pace unchanged, as if this outcome had always been expected, not because it was guaranteed, but because she had already done what was necessary to make it possible. The resident who had once dismissed her stood nearby, watching her for a second longer before speaking. "Thank you," he said, simple, direct, no hesitation this time, and Emily gave a small nod in return, accepting the words without holding on to them. Across the room, the senior physician removed his gloves one last time, his gaze moving from the patient to Emily again. But now there was no question in it, only understanding, the kind that came after seeing something undeniable. He walked toward her, stopping just close enough to be heard without drawing attention. "You changed the outcome," he said quietly, not as praise, but as fact, and Emily paused, meeting his eyes for a brief moment before responding. "The signs were there," she said, her voice calm, grounded, refusing to take ownership beyond what was true. He studied her for a second, then gave a slight nod, accepting the answer, because he knew now that what she carried was not something that needed validation. It had already proven itself. A transport team entered the room, preparing to move the general to recovery, their presence shifting the space into its next phase. And as they worked, a few of them glanced toward Emily, not out of curiosity, but recognition, subtle, unspoken. She stepped aside to give them space, her movements quiet, intentional, blending back into the rhythm of the room as if she had never stepped out of it. No one called her forward, no one announced what she had done, and she did not expect them to, because that was never the point. As the bed began to move, the senior physician watched for a moment, then turned back to where she had been standing, but she was already gone, her absence as quiet as her presence had been. Later, when the room had cleared and the noise had faded, one of the nurses noticed something small left behind on the counter, a thin bracelet, worn, simple, with faint engraved coordinates barely visible under the light, and she held it up for a second before setting it back down, unsure of its meaning but aware it mattered. No one asked about it. No one needed to, because the truth had already revealed itself in the only way that mattered, through action, through precision, through a moment where everything could have been lost but was not. And in that silence, without ceremony or explanation, the room carried forward a lesson none of them would forget, that the quietest voice can see the clearest, and respect is not demanded. It is earned in the moments where no one else is looking.